Hello, welcome back to the Smarter Privacy Podcast. This is part 2 of our Metaverse discussion. Part 1 was, I actually really enjoyed part 1. We sort of spoke about what the Metaverse was, how it's going to be used, and the internal machinations of who might be controlling it and how it will be used at a corporate level. Obviously, a lot of people saying games and things like that. Yes, it will be, but it'll be used more for the corporate level.
And as we do, there's probably going to be like 4 podcasts almost just on the Metaverse.
Yes.
In 3 or 4, we will be talking a lot more about what functions you might be performing on the Metaverse and whether they're good or bad, including communication between people, communication through avatar. We kidded around a little bit about going to a meeting with an avatar instead of a human. That really was intentional because those have consequences. And certainly, I defer to our good friends over at marketing. I'm sure that they might think they do better in real person.
Right. Yes. It's interesting. We have conversations. You know, a lot of us are working from home. And we have conversations with co-workers, and we can see our co-workers on the screen in front of us, and their eyes are glazing over. I call it they're going screensaver on me.
Oh, I can believe that.
And you can imagine trying to be a salesperson in the Metaverse, selling to someone, and then just watching them go screensaver, or their avatar go screensaver.
And yet, as an attorney, I actually enjoyed taking depositions on Zoom or through a different platform because it seemed to be easier. Other people were handling the exhibits. They could highlight them easier. I found those depositions to be pretty darn enjoyable. Nice and easy, didn't have to travel places, et cetera. So from a transaction point of view, of course, trust me, a deposition, you're not particularly concerned about whether or not anybody likes you or you're building any relationships.
Yeah, right, yes. So there's a couple of problems with the Metaverse that I'm predicting. So privacy is a privacy podcast, and that's my passion. Building, enabling better privacy regulations and developing privacy regulations is really where, as we be working together, that's my my passion. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Sure. And when you do, can you try to explain, or if you can, a little bit on ownership versus stewardship of data? If we talk a little
yes, that's a good point.
So as you come up with privacy, yeah.
Absolutely. So humans live their lives with 3 lives. That's a bit of a backwards statement, but when I explain it, you'll understand.
Okay.
So as humans, we live with a public life, a private life, and a secret life. Our public lives are what we share publicly and how we live towards a general audience. It can be a religious symbol. A lot of the Sikh and the Hindu religions, they have turbans, and so you're living you're saying that I have a religion that I follow, and you're displaying that quite publicly. If you have children and the children are walking with you, you're displaying that you have children, you have parental rights, and you're displaying those quite publicly. You also have your private life, which is information that you share with people whom you trust, and then you have your secret life, which is really just the information that is just yours, and you don't share, or you share with a very limited, exceptionally limited audience. We have laws. We have the GDPR, which is the European privacy law.
What does that stand for? The General Privacy Data
Regulations.
Yes.
We have the Californian Privacy Act. There's a couple of other states that have acts, privacy laws as well. Now, the component of why that one, the Californian Privacy Act, is because in America, 1 in 8 people is a Californian. So if you have data on Americans, your database is going to be populated by a Californian at some point. So therefore, the Californian Privacy Act applies. There's a problem with both of those regulations, is that they were built before blockchain technologies existed, and the metaverse will exist on blockchain technology. They were written and brought into law really before facial and voice recognition is a component. So I come back to, if you wear a religious artifact that can be detected by facial recognition, then the privacy law applies.
Wow.
Yes. So GDPR, Californian, does not have any facial or voice recognition technology built in, and it has no artificial intelligence, has no AI component where decisions are being made about you at a machine level component. So therefore, with the metaverse, we really need to have a rebuilt or a rethought or a reimagined set of privacy laws. And those can be laws that affect a geographical portion. So GDPR is European. Californian Privacy Act is also a component of America. And there may be a federal privacy law, which we can only hope at some point. With the technologies of the metaverse, we will need a reimagined privacy law. And that is part of what we are going to be talking about in subsequent podcasts here on the Smarter Privacy. And also that we as the digital safety group, we work with attorneys to assist them as they start getting questions coming into their law practice of, how do I solve this? How do I preempt this question? And if it's not a preemptive, it's I'm starting to get people coming in. So how can you help me? How guide us through the path of these privacy regulations in the metaverse?
One of the ways in which historically, I think lawyers and myself have approached that is to at the 50,000 foot level. I have always been surprised that most of the regulations that you've addressed, most of the discussion even about privacy, seems to focus on the requirements that governments, the requirements that law places on custodians,
yes,
to protect the data that they collect. And I have had many seminars, and I've talked to attorneys for a long time, that we don't seem to have ever addressed clearly the ownership of the raw data. The ownership of the raw data, I think, and is an important separate concept to keep in mind as we talk about how it is that we can address and help people prepare for the metaverse or respond to what we've got right here today. And to walk through that as an example and to tie into your privacy, we've got, I want to give an example of a sleep study that I went through.
Oh, yes.
And to do that, I want to keep in mind ownership of data, custodian of data, and then the concept in the law that when I give you data, when I give you some data, I give up some rights and privacy.
Yes.
So if we keep those three things in mind, here's a little mini example of a mini metaverse, and that is I'm a veteran, and I was, and I'm sharing this because it's not a problem in terms of my privacy, and that is I was given an opportunity to participate in a sleep study. So I receive in the mail a device. It's in a box.
Right.
And you take it out of the box, and you put this little device on your chest and the little thing on your finger to do your pulse ox, and the thing on your chest is listening to your heartbeat. And then you download an application on your smartphone and you go to sleep. Pull out the battery thing, turn it on, and go to sleep. And that device communicates by Bluetooth to the smartphone overnight. When you're done in the morning, you turn the device off. You can put it back in the box and mail it back to people so they can destroy it because it's only a one-use device. And the information on the application on the smartphone is then sent to some third party that gathers that up and sends it over, in this case, to the Veterans Administration. And then later on, I had like a Zoom call with a doctor to discuss about the analysis of the data. So if we just take that, here's some data that started out with some sensors. The sensors then sent information to a smartphone. The smartphone had an application. That application sent stuff across the internet to a third party, and then they presumably added it to a medical record. Now, historically, I think I own that data. That's my heartbeat data. That's my sleep information data, and I don't. And the laws dealing with the medical side seem to suggest initially that while I may own it, I've given it to the Veterans Administration. I gave it to somebody else to do the analysis of the sleep study. So they've got certain obligations to keep it safe. Is that kind of basically where the privacy starts?
Yes, indeed. So you've touched on the key fundamental of how the privacy regulations are written at the moment. They're written on the expectation that there is a data custodian, and a data owner, and a data subject. And the custodian is the person who keeps the data safe. The data subject is you and your heartbeat. Mm-hmm. But the data owner is the person who owns the data. You'll frequently see the data custodian and data owner being the same mm-hmm. company. So our social media platforms are built on very similar ideas and very similar concepts, and we sort of know that they are, even if we don't know what those words are. Is that when we put a picture onto our social media, we know that photograph of our cat Fluffy now exists on that social media platform. The social media platform owns or is the custodian of that picture. The metaverse will be different because it will be built on a blockchain technology, and since we don't necessarily know who will own or who will be the custodian of that, is those ideas that the privacy regulations are built on currently are going to either be not applicable, or they'll have to be reworked. Mm-hmm. And so let's use your example go back to your example of the sleep study, mm-hmm. is that the data custodian and the data owner, which sounds from how you described it to be very similar, almost mm-hmm. the same person or same entity, is that they now have a data set of people who have reached a certain age, have a propensity to be concerned about their health, mm-hmm. propensity of their ability to function at a self-expected level. So does the data custodian then sell that data set because you are concerned about your health? So do they sell it to health insurance partners? Do they sell it to people that sell breathing masks? I mean, that sounds like an obvious one that they're actually then trying to help you because you did a sleep study. So then maybe you need a CPAP machine. Mm-hmm. But if you're concerned that you're not able to function correctly and have drowsiness, do they then sell that information to car insurance companies who will then want to look at your car insurance premiums mm-hmm. and put you in a group of, if you have a accident, or if you were included in this group, do we change your policy and not necessarily tell you why, but just sort of we use this information?
And that is really important. One way to conceive of this is that the raw data, my sleep process, that's raw data. Putting that information into a large pool of people allows third parties to infer things about everybody in the pool, even though they don't know the names of them. It might infer that everybody in this pool, because they have sleep apnea, or because they have XYZ, or because they're suspected of having something, we can look at that entire pool of people and then maybe do some studies about how does this data compare to driving records, et cetera, and we can begin to infer what's loosely called business intelligence. We begin to infer analytic information about the people in the pool. That information doesn't exist, that analysis, until you have the pool and you do some analysis. Who does that information belong to? This is now the inferred information. This is the data that is not truly the raw data, but it's inferred from the raw data.
Yes.
But it's about the people in the pool. It may be about me in that regard, and I consider that perhaps even more important that people don't make the wrong inferences about that. And we've got that today, right now, that piece of life in which we intersect with devices to create data that goes on to be analyzed so that we can get services from other people across the internet, et cetera. That entire universe is very similar to what we'll see in a metaverse, with some significant differences. You've mentioned ownership and custodian and privacy. We are also going to see some challenges that when I did that sleep study, I was on a platform that was controlled by the Veterans Administration. I was on another platform that was controlled by maybe the Google App Store or whatever in order to download the app. I was on platforms. I was using servers that belonged to real companies who owned them under their rules, and I had a target that I could say to you're the guys that have my sleep study information, you better keep this information private. In the metaverse, we're supposedly going to enter a world in which there are no individually owned silos or platforms. We're supposed to be able to go everywhere, and the leakage concepts of where your data is going to end up boggle the mind.
Yes. So this idea of people having, with this leakage, this idea of people having expectations of three separate lives, a public life, a private life, and a secret life, is going to start being eroded, and needs to be where the definitions of those three lives and those three expectations needs to be codified into a privacy law.
And if we then take into account the thing we were talking about before, this concept that the data has an ownership piece, the data has a custodian piece, but that's what we've got today. If we're now going to move into a place called the metaverse, where data may flow more freely, maybe a little harder to figure out who's got those ownership interests, et cetera, we are going to, as attorneys, we're going to be faced with this dichotomy, which is by entering the metaverse, by going in, do we give up certain rights just by being there? Do we have to sign an agreement to have an avatar? And if we sign an agreement to be given an avatar, what does that mean? And we've already in the law managed to do some stuff that when I first began practicing, I would have thought were a little odd. Shrink wrap agreements with software where you got to agree to the agreement before you can read it because it's inside the package.
Yes.
All right, well, fine. I mean, maybe the same thing with avatars might appear, that you have to agree to the rules of the avatar.
Yep.
And maybe, so when we say that the metaverse is evolving or it's emerging,
yes,
we don't even know. We don't know. It's substituting a human for an avatar, I find a bit bizarre. But in our little sleep study example, we did at least give people an idea that in the event that they're doing something more serious than a sleep study, you may want to consider talking to your attorney, or if you're an attorney, you may want to think through, are there services that your clients are going to want to know about when they begin to enter these kinds of contracts that ubiquitously seem to be so simple? Would you like to get in a survey? No problem. We can get you fixed up. You can talk to a doctor. But from my point of view, I'm entering all kinds of different digital worlds with digital rules. My information's going out the door pretty quickly.
Yes.
It's being amassed and being used by lots and lots of different people, all of whom are treating it as if they own it.
Yeah.
Similar to like electric companies that treat the fact that they allegedly own your usage,
yes,
information, et cetera. So, go ahead.
So part one, we spoke about the different laws that the metaverse will touch. Obviously, intellectual property law, patents law, trade secrets, copyright law, privacy law, contract law. There was one that this is really the privacy law I spoke on, but there's one in there that'll be the employment law. Would you like to sort of touch on that as an attorney, and within the metaverse of what questions you are foreseeing other attorneys will need help with answering?
Yeah, we've got that. I think those questions are pretty much right now we have those questions. Some of the employers have done a very good job of understanding how it is that the employee relationship needs to be structured to protect the employer's information, et cetera. But as we get down to smaller companies, the SMB groups, a lot of those companies don't have protections in place from a technological point of view. What we've done as attorneys is we've fallen back on a lot of contract provisions. So, for example, if we have an office manager that's going to work from home, IT can make that happen rather quickly. We can make that happen almost for free. You could use Chrome, I suppose, if you wanted to it's not very great, but you could use remote utilities that allow you to have the home computer basically tie right into the work computer through the internet and then pass the router at the company and actually operate the work computer. If you were to sit there and turn the monitor on, you'd see the mouse move, you'd see things happening, as in effect, they're operating the computer from home. And the question at that point in time seems to be resolved. Well, that's kind of neat. They're not really saving anything to their home computer. They're saving it to the work computer, and we have a safe connection. And because we're not really relying on their computer to do much, as long as we've got a firewall up and they don't have anything on their home computer that might come in and invade our network, we should be in good shape. But there is a risk of invading our network. There is a risk that they've got something on there. So the employer, again, has additional concerns. The employee, on the other hand, might be being told, don't worry, we can't see what's in your computer, and you should have no problem, therefore, we're never going to be inside your computer to do anything. The issue comes about, at least in a couple of cases, where the employee decides to form a competing company. And to do that, you're right, can't download anything. Let me see, I can't download what I'm looking at. I can't make a copy of it because they'll know, what could I do in order to get this document or this customer list? Well, I got an idea. Why don't I use my smartphone, take a picture of it?
Yes.
Or some nonsense like that.
Yes.
And they do. Good.
I mean, it'd also be what regulations is my employment now under? If we're sat in America and we're American, we consider that our employment would be American. If we're in England or in Europe, we would assume that our employment law would follow either the UK or the European. But in the metaverse, you're not going to be in. It's almost as if you're in international waters.
Well, and it may be handled as it is now. It may be handled by contract, again, where you agree that you will be subject to, Western Australian law when you do something, buy an avatar, enter someplace, go through a building on the metaverse, and all this needs to be knocked out. You can imagine how crazy that would be if in the metaverse, while the platforms were magically not owned by individuals who demanded different rules every time you changed platform. If the platforms are built in such a way that you don't notice you've changed platforms, you've moved from what used to be a Facebook platform now into a Microsoft platform and over here into the Amazon platform, and you're doing all this and without seeing any walls or anything, then the question becomes well, if I enter an Amazon store, am I now subject to Amazon and their rules while I'm in the store? But if I come out of the little digital shopping mall and I go someplace else, am I subject to other rules?
Yeah.
And that's not so hypothetical. Facebook has been charged with first time that Facebook's ever been charged with a criminal activity. They were charged in a crime, I believe it's this month, the month of March 2022, in Western Australia. That's why I chose Western Australia. I just read that.
Uh-huh.
And they were charged, and Facebook has simply refused to show up on the ground. There's no jurisdiction of us in Western Australia. So Facebook basically saying, in effect, if this article is correct, Facebook is basically saying in the article as reported that there's no jurisdiction over Facebook in Western Australia, and the article is saying, yes, there is. And so your observation of what jurisdiction is going to apply, all of that is going to need to be sorted out. And in the meantime, that means that attorneys, especially if you're going to start helping clients, you've at least got to have a place where you can come to kind of keep track of what's happening. We're going to be putting up a lot of white papers and stuff on the DSG site, so hopefully we get a lot of attorneys reading the stuff. Some of this stuff the clients may like to read, but a lot of it may be white papers designed to track different laws and may or may not be interesting to you. But the metaverse is here. The very things we're talking about are here today, and the need to prepare for them is really important. If not, you're going to have, you'll find that on the reactive side, you're going to end up with extremely expensive litigation because, in my experience, when you do begin to poke through and do begin to find the contracts that govern your digital existence on a platform as it exists right now, you find that there are some jurisdictional places. They've got you doing arbitration someplace I've never heard of before. And it'll be real interesting to see how that works out. VPNs, for example, as a matter of fact, I just read another article the other day, VPN out of Panama, registered in Panama, VPN out of Panama basically had an entire change in the manner in which it reported to the world. Does it keep logs? And will it cooperate with law enforcement? And they used to have a statement says, not only do we not keep any logging activity, but we won't respond to law enforcement. That's been changed slightly to now, not only do we not have logging activity, but we won't respond to law enforcement unless we are presented with a valid court order. And the question then becomes, has anyone ever ordered them to turn logging on? And do VPNs, therefore, which if you don't know what they are, they're nothing more than a piece of software that they're another middleman. When you connect to the internet, you connect to this VPN. The VPN on one hand connects and gives you a new address, a new identity in a sense, and allows you to go out into the internet. And if somebody wants to know, well, who is this person, they'd have to ask the VPN, and the VPN says, we don't know who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a little bit like that. So that entire area of privacy, as it sits now in employment law, in making your connection to the employer, your rights as an employee, the ability of the employer to reach into your device, to demand your device during litigation, to demand that you produce that device if need be, that's all on the table. Your expectation of privacy is completely changed because of that, even though you're inside your own home. And on the flip side, the possibility of abuse is always existing. And where are you going to go to cure that problem ahead of time if you don't take some steps to prevent it? And on the technology side, as you'll see in some subsequent podcasts, we've got a lot of suggestions that one can take if you've got the time, the skill, and the management techniques you can take to protect the device and proactively make it more difficult for people to take advantage of you.
Yes, and that is the mandate here at the Smarter Privacy Podcast, to help people navigate those questions.
And to keep that private part of your life private, and that secret part even more private. That is a real challenge, and you don't need to be an expert in this area to see that in today's world, more and more often we are seeing the devices become the witnesses that lead us to people that are doing things that we would rather that they didn't be doing, etc. That's the devices. In the world itself, we can see today that people that went on Facebook, for example, and posted threats or posted their frustrations as to Governor Christy Whitmer in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. There are 4 defendants in a criminal case, and they were going to kidnap the governor. And so these bozos put a bunch of stuff on Facebook, and they said some things on Facebook that indicated that they were planning some kind of violence or what have you. And they're in the middle of a court case now that's been reported in the news, and based on the reports in the news, that's all I can do is repeat them. What the FBI is testifying to is that all of these posts they made on Facebook, they made post after post after post, that are being read to the jury, and when someone says, well, that was intended as a joke, we all know how that sounds. You read a joke that went over badly and you read it to somebody 5 years later or something, it doesn't sound like a joke anymore. So even the content has to be thought of. And in today's world, that's today's world now, to avoid cancel culture and everything else. That's right now. It is going to get exceptionally more difficult within a few years as the metaverse grows and grows and grows, and as some of these challenges get corrected. And the concept of privacy.
Yes.
I think everything that you've said about privacy, I think the real problem, the real challenge we've got is, what are we going to have to give up to join the metaverse? Because all I got to do is say, here's your avatar. But in order for you to have an avatar, in order for you to be in the metaverse, here's what you have to give up.
Yeah.
And I just write you out of all the privacy regs.
Exactly.
And that would not be too good. So somebody's going to have to be reviewing that stuff, and we'll be out in front of all of that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, we hope so.
Yes. Right. So that's part 2 of the Smarter Privacy podcast towards the topic of the metaverse. There will be more podcasts coming. There may be more podcasts coming about the metaverse.
We're really going to do a deep dive into what some authors have said the metaverse will be, with an eye, is this just an expansion of what we're doing in game land? I mean, isn't there going to be something more to it than this?
There has to be more.
And we got to get past headsets and gloves.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Indeed. All right. Thank you. Bye for now.